how data engineering works around the world, since you worked in different regions like
If you compare that to a country like if like UAE, UAE is great. I'm a big fan of the UAE. Maybe one day I'll hopefully end up there myself as well.
what are the three tools do you use regularly in the daily task?
If someone who doesn't want to be a manager, who wants to be an IC, but knows that they can't get stuff done as an IC, so they need to be a manager. So, I feel like a lot of successful managers are truly an IC at heart.
Today's guest has been in the data world for more than 10 years. He is leading the data team in world's largest online betting platform and processing hundreds of terabytes of data. He has worked across Edinburgh, London, and Dubai market. The most interesting part is that he doesn't have a CS degree. He started with business degree. Now he is a data engineer. If you're so curious to know about what is the data engineering and how to get in, and what are the jobs available in the global market, or if you are an app developer like me, to know understand like how the data works when the user interacts with the application, then this episode is for you. Let's invite our guest to get in. Hi, Zain Chughtai. Welcome to the Swift Publish podcast. So, how are you doing?
Hi, Sabat. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. Yeah, doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Happy to have you in our podcast. It has been long waiting. I think last month we have tried. It is really good to have you, and thanks for accepting our invitation. Before getting into the data stuffs, I would like to ask you one question. You started your tech career as an app development for I think like ice hockey team, and suddenly you moved to data engineer, data roles, and now you are leading the teams. So why this turnaround?
I guess it's one of those things where in life, whatever comes your way, you take it and you see where it brings you. So it was probably one of those occurrences where yes, I started off in the app development side of things, but that was when I was in just straight out of university. And then an opportunity came by in London where I just couldn't say no. I think for all the young listeners out there, and or anyone really, if you have opportunities that are coming your way that are different, that are strange, scary, you take them from the horn and you ride with it. And you see what happens. And as a 18, 19-year old, that's what I did. Whatever opportunity came my way, I took it, and I just saw where it led and kept going down my path there.
That's interesting. There are a lot of people who can relate themselves, and, they might have been in the clean roadmap, then eventually they move to where they are. So it sounds interesting, and I want to ask you what does data engineering mean? Many of them are confusing this topic. So can you give me the walkthrough or give us a better explanation so that our audience can understand from you?
Yeah, I guess each company defines these roles in their own way, right? You'll have your data analyst, your data scientist, your data engineers. They all have, I guess, they're all a downstream user of the data. Or I guess more so data engineering is the one who's preparing. They're the ones who are preparing the data. So, the roles of a data engineer is essentially to ingest your data. That could be through APIs or through applications, clean your data, and by that I mean, make it accurate, make it usable. So, normally data engineers go through this like an ETL, like a extraction, transformation, load process that they're doing. Essentially, you want to make sure as a data engineer, the data is accurate, it's on time, and is usable. Right. And then you have your end stakeholders of your data, where you have your data insights, who that role I'd say is more of a reactive role. So you have the data, and now you're trying to identify trends, you're trying to identify insights, and based on those trends and insights, what do we change for a possible increase in revenue? And then another stakeholder of your data is your data scientist. Now, there you're more proactive, predictive roles, where I have this data, and based on X patterns, we can predict that a user or a player may have X or ABC behavior. And based off of that, you make your relevant changes. But nowadays, what you see in the market is, for some data engineers, they expect you to have ML background, or they expect you to understand how to best use AI in a wider scope. So what at least what I'm noticing is a trend, a new evolved kind of role where either you have an AI data engineer or an AI engineer or data scientist who pretty much does the data engineering, the insights, and the ML modeling. So in today's modern world, it's you kind of need to be familiar with bits of bobs of everything, but in a traditional sense, it's what I explained earlier.
I see there are some these roles are interlinked to each other, right? Some way interconnected. That's what I
hmm
understood. How did you get into this data roles? Even though you don't have that CS degree, you have a business degree. So how did you get into this?
I think with all tech roles, right, it's not just bound to the data engineering spectrum, from software engineers to all sorts. Like the colleagues that I've worked with throughout the years either have a geography background, a maths background, not necessarily, a computer science background. And a lot of companies earlier on like that, so they could mold you, train you in the way that they into their ways of working. Um, how I got into it, again, it's one that it's in tech. What I find is there will be companies who care about your background, what university you came, if you've done a master's, if you've done a PhD, what brands you've worked with, etc. But majority of my experience, the companies are mainly asking, what can you bring to the table? And if you have those necessary skills, we'll consider you and look into you. And that's exactly what happened with me. I had the minimum, I guess, or the skills required for the role. They seemed to like me. I could have been a personality hire as well. I feel like that's a big thing in today's world, where you have to be able to, talk the talk and walk the walk. So yeah, that's how I kind of landed into it. I didn't really have a business or a computer science background. I had dabbled in maybe some SQL, some business systems that are relatively technically or orientated, but I've never did coding in my life. Barely touched, I probably didn't understand what an orchestration workflow is, or how to orchestrate a workflow, what a batch pipeline is. And you just learn on the job with most things, right? I've spoken with so many C-suite level people, and when they first got their chief position, we all have these imposter syndromes, even at the highest level. And what do? You take it on the chin, and you learn every day, and you hope that today is better than yesterday. And with that, you end up somehow in my position.
So if someone from our audience, like they have 22 years of old, they are 22 years of old and they don't have the CS degree. If they want to start as a data engineer, how can they start? So do you have any tips
Yeah.
on that?
So as a data engineer, you still need to be relatively technical, right? So I'd say try to understand the fundamentals. And these fundamentals are shared across different roles. So as you learn these fundamentals, and not only are you preparing yourself to be a data engineer, but to be a scientist, analyst, whatever in the data world. By fundamentals, what I mean, I feel like SQL, structured query language, is a very basic must-have in if you're dealing with data. A coding language, if it's either Java, Python is the more common one when it comes to data engineering. Understanding fundamentals like how do you model your data, a big thing now is cloud. Make sure you're familiar with AWS and its functionalities, GCP, Azure, and on those systems as well. How does the storage work? How does the compute work? The IM, the networking side of things. Understand what is a pipeline, the different types of pipelines. So you can have streaming pipelines, batch pipelines, and how do you orchestrate your workflows? And all of these things, any data engineering role, it's almost the same. When it comes to orchestration, right now, Airflow and Dagster, they're the biggest tools and frameworks that most companies are using. So, okay, what is Airflow? How do I create a DAG? What does that mean in compared to how companies would have previously done it? And then, you take it up a level as well, where you add testing, right? Making sure that your data is reliable. You add a CI/CD functionality, so now there's no manual deployments. It's after a review and running some automated tests, it gets deployed to production. Have some an observability layer. Continuously checking, is my data correct? Is my data late? All these different checks to ensure that you're safeguarding the accuracy and reliability of your data. And then moreover, it's around the governance. Governance and security is becoming a big thing with everything going on right now. So I think these points, if you can understand them at a practical level, not just a theoretical level, then you're set for a lot of roles, not just the engineering side of things. But what I have noticed in the market is if you are, I wouldn't say that it's probably the best time to start into the data engineering spectrum. So in the market, you don't really see many graduate junior data engineering roles. They're more mid-level above. So for those people who already have, say, 5 to 10 years of experience, it's about really getting deep diving into their existing knowledge and going into this, how do I architect an end-to-end solution? For those who don't necessarily have all the or they're just fresh out of university, I would say develop these skills, but keep an eye out for the new roles that are opening up and make sure that you're incorporating those skills as well, because data engineering will always be there. It's the foundation of your data and how data is used. But you're seeing the demand for data engineers is more, we need people who understand the end-to-end solution rather than the junior side. But we can get into that later as well and why that's happening.
So that's a valuable insight from you, and this roadmap can be helpful for the beginners, or anyone can start with this. So you have mentioned a lot of roles. You have mentioned the cloud and also SQL. Start with the SQL and everything. So going ahead, that people still think that data engineering, they do have the dashboards or SQL queries. Apart from that, there are so many things, and you have worked on the online betting company, right? So that is really huge things. So can you just tell us like how does it work, online betting?
How online betting, it's very similar to how most companies, or data in general is very similar to how or most companies would work, right? You have some sort of activity that happens either on your application, on your website, some kind of events, payments, settlements, etc. Those that data is then ingested into some kind of data store, which then gets or streamlined into your data warehouse or your data lake. The difference comes in the companies is the scale of data and the type of data, right? So some companies may, after a decade may only have 10, 20, maybe 100 GB of data, right? In our instance, we had hundreds of terabytes of data, right, across different regions. So it was all about how do we ingest the data efficiently, right? When you're ingesting gigabytes of data on a daily basis, it gets quite difficult. And then and then making sure that that data is cleansed and there for the relevant reporting needs. Now, I guess in the gambling industry, the only thing different, in every industry you have your different, your different types of transactional data. It's just about the end of the day, what do you want to do with the data, right? Each company
Yeah.
deals with data differently.
So, in terms of the online betting, like you have
Mhm.
the user bets and that configurations, and also like what to say, live odds. Those things are there, right? So, how do you handle all these in real time, and give the user the data?
So yeah, so there's so many third parties that we work with as well. And yes, you're right. In the gambling industry, you have your activity, your payments, your gambling odds, your settlements. In terms of the main type of data that I would have worked with is your online gaming, so slots, poker, etc. So your online kind of not necessarily where you have a human interacting with you, where the odds are changing like sports betting. So for slots, for these type of games, the odds are predetermined. So the game itself has some kind of mathematical model where it's known as a RTP, return to player. So after and it'll say something like 96% RTP. And what essentially that means is that on average you'll get 96% of your bettings back, right? So if you were to bet £100, you would get on average £96 back. So each game is predetermined. So in a way, you're kind of playing to lose, but obviously that drive of the chance of winning big or the way that the game is designed is what I guess attracts the customers to stay on the site.
Zain, you mentioned about the hundreds of terabytes of data and so many configuration and also third parties. Everything are involving right in the dependencies. If I want to tap some button, place a bet. So how does it work in the real time? Like 5 seconds, you will be getting the all data and you are giving those things right. And we need to show in the view. So how does it work?
Yeah, so we do have certain triggers in place. But a lot of the stuff is not necessarily real time. Companies they love the keyword real time, but there isn't that many uses of real time. So stuff that we've implemented is, like you said, where a customer or player creates an activity and their data lands into your whatever data store that you're using. And then yes, we do have reactive marketing applications in place where if a member was to, I don't know, play on three different games, they immediately get prompted with the relevant marketing campaign or whatever the promotion may be. So how like you said, how that works is data gets ingested. We're reading the data in real time.
Online betting that we have the certain regulations, right? And since you are in European, so you might have that GDPR policies and other compliances, right? So how differs from the data that used in the regular e-commerce industries?
How's the difference? So in the gambling industry, yes, we're confined to Europe's GDPR regulations, but also each country and each state, so Bally's is across the US, Europe, and many other parts of the world. And each country and state has its own regulations as well. So we need to make sure we're compliant. Otherwise, there's massive fines, right? And we take our auditing and our compliance with the frameworks that we put in place is very strict to the point where we even give ourselves some leniency. So say, for example, if you have to identify a member that has no activity for X amount of years, or say 5 years, we make sure to identify them in 4.5 years. So we have that half a year gap as well. Everything that we have is config driven, trying to make it as simple as possible. The mean time to production as well for these processes. So say if we were to enter a new country, we have frameworks set and ready in place that if a new regulation was to come into play, it would take us a few weeks to really implement it. So it's about safeguarding yourself, making sure you're liaising with your legal team, understanding what regulatory requirements are required for the respective country and their regulation. And every year these regulations change, so you got to make sure that not only it's not just an ad hoc process that you're creating a scalable process that can go into different markets that can adapt in the next few years as well.
Okay, Zain, I completely understand the regulations part and also how the data works in terms of this high level online betting. And I want to move to the next segment, that is a data engineering around the world. How data engineering works around the world, since you worked in different regions like Edinburgh, London, and also Dubai. So, what do you feel? Which country do you feel is very good to start as a data engineer, especially for the people who are in India or Southeast Asia?
Yeah, each region has its own pros and cons, right? If you're in a big city like London, competition is going to be quite high. but also the demand is going to be there, right? So places like London, New York, these big city, you have competitive salary, you have high competition, you feel like you're part of something big, you know. And it's very fast paced, which I really enjoy. You know, you're always on the go, your mind's going, and it's very nice. If you compare that to a country like UAE. Now, UAE is great. I'm a big fan of the UAE. You know, maybe one day I'll hopefully end up there myself as well. In UAE, you have the tax benefit, right? We're no income tax, so the standard of living, the security, the cleanliness in UAE is unmatched to many countries. But and the packages are quite good. The packages in the UAE used to be pretty good back in the day, like 5, 10 years ago, where they would do your relocation, get your company car. Whereas now you're seeing more. There's still a lot of jobs, but it's difficult because in a place like London, if I was to look for a data engineering or any data related job, I go on LinkedIn. There's like 800 new roles that were published just yesterday. Whereas in the UAE, if you go on LinkedIn and search for data related roles for yesterday, probably find like maybe 20, maybe 10, you know. It's very difficult to see the market in UAE. It's very much of from my experience, it's been trying to through people and they go by referral basis. I know this person, I know they worked on this, therefore I recommend this individual for the role. One thing I'd say is don't turn away from any of these opportunities. And it's not just UE or the UK. For any, I know a lot of people still have the stigma of UE being a very dangerous place, a very closed-minded place. I don't think I've ever seen the UAE like that, right? I've never felt that. I've never seen that. And same with London. I'm sure London has its own prejudices. Just don't say no to it. If an opportunity does come by for any region that is striving. Like Dubai's tech industry is emerging, right? It's an emerging market where when you go there, they have museums and conferences of the latest tech. Last time I went over there, I went to some kind of robotics tech conference. They had robots that were serving you food, that were dancing on to different music. It's very much like the States. Now the States, I'd say, is the driving, no question asked. Is when it comes to tech. States is definitely in the leading category, right? When it comes to salary, they're probably one of the highest paid. If you're in the tech industry, is the States. The tech emerging from the States is unmatched in many regions. You know, maybe you have China, Japan, that region as competition. So the way I would look at it, in fact, is yes, you've got your America, your Asia, whatever tech kind of emerges from there, you'll see that in Dubai in a month or two, right? It emerges, if it's successful, then you'll see it in Dubai. So maybe Dubai or UAE is the places where all the successful tech end up going, or if there's any traction elsewhere, they'll bring it over there. So yeah, it really depends what you're looking after, if it's salary, if it's sun, if it's work-life balance, if it's the tech stack that I'll be using. It really then that determines what region that you'll end up in.
Yeah, I would like to highlight that point that most of the data engineers go to the US, as you mentioned, the states is more over, and you gave the clear comparison of between the Dubai and London, so it's really helpful for the audience. And here, like how does the data engineer interview look like? So what are the levels of interview, and what are the things they have to prepare before attending the interview?
Man, it's long. Oh my God. I think with most tech, including data engineering, it's just long interviews, uh, more often than not, it's like 4 or 5 different rounds, right? Where your first round, and it's the same kind of throughout your junior to senior lead level, except the conversation that you're having and what's being discussed will be different. But usually it's an introduction call with the recruiter or the hiring or the HR team. Then it's more often not a technical interview. So it could be in today's world, it could be an AI driven technical interview where you have a software like Perplexity that is conducting the interview and they send that off to the hiring team, or it's a take-home test, or it's a live coding test. Um, and what I'm seeing is this is all changing, right? Even with these live coding tests, some companies like your Facebooks, your FAANG companies, you have like an hour allocated slot, and it's like you got to get 6 questions done in this hour. Read the question, do it. It's all about pace, fast pace, and make sure the answer is correct. Um, and whereas other companies, maybe you're doing more of a peer-to-peer where you have a question and it's more like a real life scenario that you're working with an individual. So if it was you and I, we'd be discussing different approaches and why you've gone through that and not necessarily a time-based thing. But what I am seeing is a shift. People are, even with these kind of live coding scenarios, many individuals you have these AI assistants, so maybe they're cheating more often, maybe they're not being as transparent as who's conducting who's giving the answers. So I am noticing more of a shift in terms of how AI is being used. But anyway, that would be your first stage. So you have some kind of technical interview. The next stage could be if it's a take home, a presentation, an hour or two presentation on the assessment that you've done. And then you could and have a architectural conversation on why you chose to go this way, what would you change. Then after that, it's more of like a panel interview that you'll have where it's like 4 to 5 hours where you're speaking to different individuals and they're assessing you on how you interact with different stakeholders. So as a data engineer, you'll be, as mentioned earlier in the conversation, that your downstream stakeholders would be your data scientists and your data analysts. So how do you interact with those kind of roles, and what kind of questions you would ask, how you would gather the requirements, how you would go about modeling your data and architecting it. Then you would have a behavioral part as well in this panel interview. And then yeah, at the end of that, so they would make a decision and then you'd hear back. So it's long because each interview, on average, they're like an hour to 2 hours, but they can go up to 4 to 5 hours, and they can spread that across the days as well. But it takes time to interview for these places. It takes around, I'd say, a month from end to end, and that's you've passed every single bit of your interview as well. So yeah, it's long. It's technical. People are, you know. I guess how it works is on your CV, do you have the keywords and the impact metrics? So have you used the tools and tech stack that we're using or that we want to use? And what impact have you brought in your previous whatever work experience that may be? And then after that, it's really about, okay, you've mentioned these keywords, you mentioned you've done this. Can you prove that you've done this to me, right? So the first technical interviews are always more of a high level thing. Do you understand the fundamentals? Can you converse with me? Are we on the same page when we have a technical conversation? Then it's a more, okay, we've done that. Now showcase your best abilities in these different scenarios.
So you mentioned about the resumes, right? I have seen a lot of job description. They have mentioned like Spark, Kafka, and Airflow, Terraform, and Kubernetes. A lot of things in one. They are expecting in one person. Like, so how does it work? So does the data engineer must know all these tools or libraries?
Yes and no, right? The more you know, the stronger you'll be, the stronger of a candidate you'll be, right? If in a company's perspective, they're trying to hire someone that can do as many things so they don't have to hire more resources, right? So if you are an individual that has experience with infrastructure as code, so using Terraform, then that's a big tick, right? Because otherwise people they hire individuals who they specialize in this, data in values they call them data systems, or sometimes it's the DevOps guys. So it's good to have all those skills, but it's not a must. I'd say there are different parts of the data engineering side of things, right? So when it comes to streaming, right? You have your Spark streaming, your Kafka, you've got Kafka as an application, you've got Kinesis. You don't need to know everything, right? Because
Okay.
they all act in a very similar way, right? You receive data and you send out data, and you have a bunch of metadata along with that. So they all act in the same way. So I'd say try and master one of them because they're very much transferable skills, right? And then what you'll realize is there's a pattern with these things. So depending on the company that you want to join. If you want to go for a startup, you'll see the startups they prefer to use GCP, right? Maybe it's the analytical capabilities of BigQuery. So if you do want to go from that startup vibe, try and direct your interest towards everything that's GCP. More mature companies, you'll see that they're using AWS,
AWS.
and then
Okay.
exactly, and then look at all the functionalities of AWS. Get an interest in that, and once you have that, you don't really need to know GCP or Azure. You understand the fundamentals, and I'd say that's enough. So the way I would do it is compare all the toolings. So if I'm using a cloud provider, GCP, AWS, Azure, why would I want to learn about AWS versus GCP? I wouldn't bother spending time on learning all of them. Otherwise, can't know everything, right? You want to kind of be a specialist in some areas, or a master of none, and jack of all trades kind of thing. It works as well.
Yeah, yeah, Zain. So your valuable insight that will be useful for our audience, especially you mentioned about the interview perspective and also resume and also the job description. What are the tools and skills must have? So audience can relate to their career. And before that, I would like to ask you something about your tech stack. So what are the tech stacks you are really strong? Like, what are the three tools do you use regularly in the daily task for the daily task?
Yeah, so I guess in my position, the tech that I've been using quite recently is Databricks. Databricks is one of them. Is I'm a big fan of Databricks for all the functionalities that it gives, the simplicity of Databricks, and just the AI ML capabilities, right? Databricks is a big powerful tool in today's market, right? And again, just to compare, if you're not using Databricks as a warehousing solution, people are using Snowflake, right? So
Yeah.
again, you wanna see which one works best with whatever companies are aligned with yourself. So yeah, in terms of tech stack, I'd say it's Databricks. Coding would be Python, SQL, AWS. I'm quite familiar with as well. Everything AWS native when it comes to those features, from Glue, Crawler. Just really whatever tech stack that you're going to, or whatever software framework or tool that you're going to use, make sure you know that tool inside out. I think that's the biggest thing, right? If if you're a beginner, mid-level, even a senior, if someone's, and more often than not, what you realize, or what you'll see, is that some lead or some architect made a decision to use Databricks or to use AWS, to say we want to use Databricks for our batch pipelines, and this is how it's going to be done.
Sounds good. Here in app development, we usually argue between the UI kit and Swift UI. And similarly, I heard that from data engineer perspective, Databricks and Snowflakes. So what does it differs between these two?
So they're complete. So their pricing model is different. With how just from storage and compute. With Databricks, it's Spark native. So Spark is very efficient with how it deals with data, and it saves it in its in cache memory, so it becomes very efficient. Databricks also, it has a bunch of other features as well. I'm not too familiar with Snowflake. I know with Snowflake, it's towards the people who want maybe less control over how to build a pipeline. Maybe they're more their knowledge is more SQL heavy, and I think it's easier for people to assimilate towards your Snowflake tech stack. Whereas Databricks, you can customize it. You have control over a lot of things. So yeah, I'd say those are pretty strong differences between the two.
Okay. Okay. So you were a IC, like individual contributor to the same company, and then you move to a tech lead. So is there any point of time like you want to come back to a IC, or you want to maintain the same?
So, do I want to come back to IC? I'd argue that I understand the more up on the ladder you go, the less IC it becomes. But if you look at your career and all the individuals and all the leaders that had a positive impact for yourself, what made them great? Was it the fact that they knew how to manage people? Was it that they can talk your language? Um, what made them great? For me, all the great leaders and or the people that had an influence on me have shown that it's always important to stay a strong IC in some way or form, right? And by that, I guess I mean stay strong to your technical side of things, right? As a lead in my company, I'd say the split was probably 70-30, where 70% is IC and 30% is the management side of things. I feel like if you are in the tech industry, you need to, or not even, I guess in this day and age, everyone is in the tech industry, right? With how things are going. So I think you got to be strong. You've got to contribute. Maybe not by individual tasks, but you have to stay technically strong. Now, do I want to go back as an IC contributor where I'm picking up individual stories, and just sprint by sprint, you're picking up tasks and you're doing it. I think that's good. I think it's important to do that because you lose touch, right? You lose touch of what the engineers are going through, the pain points they're experiencing, right? Because one can only speak from their experience, and if you've lost touch of why is this process taking so long? The engineers are saying it's going to take a month, but from your knowledge, it should really take a few days. So what's going on over here? And you can have as many refinement sessions, but at a high level, sometimes you disregard certain points being made. So I think it's very important for people to sometimes be hands-on. A good example I remember is the on-call experience, where leadership they were dismissing, it's on call. You get called at 2 a.m., just fix it, you get paid 20, 30 pounds. Just fix it and be happy that you're getting paid 20, 30 pounds, right? And they had lost touch of the last time they had been on call, probably 10 years ago, right? They had forgotten that if you get called at 2 a.m., you're working for 2 hours, you can't show up at work at 9 a.m. then, you're working on a much lower capacity. So I think it's very good for to have some level of IC to make sure you understand what the groundwork looks like. But outside of an act, picking up tasks, I think it's very strong for anyone these days to stay technically strong, to understand the latest architecture, how things are put together. Um, but yes, as you go up the chain, it's I guess you go from solving problems yourself to making sure that the team can solve them, right? That's the biggest difference. So yes, there is less coding. There's more decisions, more alignment, more responsibility. So it's yeah. And it's not just more responsibility. I'd say it's a completely different role. The higher up you go as well, right? You're involved in a different perspective of the business. Like I was mentioning earlier, as an engineer, you get told what to do. Here's task one, two, three. But once you become a lead, you get to see, different conversations around resourcing, around the technical stack that you want to incorporate. And I think that's very important for anyone to have that experience in terms of getting that visibility of what's the bigger picture over here? What's the business trying to achieve over here? Because that I think will set you for a long-term successful trajectory, right? Having that kind of product experience, understanding what the end-to-end product is. But the management side is quite fun. You get to lead a team, you get to grow a team, you see people go from mid-level to seniors to lead, get to see them flourish and be happy in their roles. Um, So yeah, I'm digressing a bit over here, but would I ever want to go back to a pure IC role? No, because you wouldn't be involved that much in the strategic decisions. You wouldn't be on the big table, which is quite important for your own career and your own knowledge. Um, it's good when when you want that repetition, you know, the practice with repetition. Give me a let me get it in my head. Let me do this two, three, four, five times. Now I understand exactly how to productionize this or how to create a streaming application, and then move on to the next thing. So it's good to when you want to start building that foundation.
So you mentioned that there should be a hands-on and some practice even when you become a lead or a managing the people. So that's really good because some people find that is a like managing is tough sometimes. So they want to come back to the individual contributor and do the technical part. I think based on your advice, the many people can learn from you. And
And I'd say
next one
this,
is
those people who do become managers or a great manager is someone who doesn't want to be a manager, who wants to be an IC, but knows that they can't get stuff done as an IC, so they need to be a manager, if that makes any sense, right? So as an IC, I need to get this. I need to get, or I want to get a lower latency layer, or I want to introduce this, and I know that it won't get done unless I am the manager and I'm pushing for this. So, you know, I feel like a lot of successful managers are truly an IC at heart.
yeah, that's a good differences. So you mentioned about the real life situation scenarios as well. And in terms of AI, also there are so many tools, right? Cursor, Windsurf, and other Replit. So many tools are there. So are these tools are helping the data engineers in any way?
Absolutely. You know, I think where people are worried where a data engineer, these AI tools are going to replace the data engineering roles or the text or whatever data related roles. I don't think it's going to replace it at all. You know, it'll replace some mundane tasks, absolutely, but it's going to make you a 10xer. You know, it's going to increase your efficiency by quite a bit. So it's very important to know what the latest is in AI. You know, why are people using Cursor? Why are people using Claude Code? I think they released a new version, Mythos, that's meant to be, you know, the next thing for security handling. So it enhances your capabilities. You know, with AI uh, in the picture, debugging, documentation, testing, writing basic SQL, Python, that would have taken you so long and it's just draining sometimes. Can be, excuse me, can be perfected with AI now. So I think with any role, not just data, I mean, especially in the tech industry, but with any role, you should be wanting to see what are people using, you know, what tools is it? Is it N8N? Is it what AI IDEs? Is it Cairo on AWS? Is it Claude Code? Is it your Cursor, your Windsurf? Uh, Definitely be on the train for that. If you're not, you will get left behind, and people who are looking for new data engineers, they will be looking for people with, okay, how AI is a big thing. Everyone has been talking about AI, but how do we actually use it? What benefit are we going to actually have, and how can you help implement this?
So, like before wrapping the session, I would like to ask you one question. Like, it's a kind of advice for the beginners. So, biggest mistake the like the beginners do when they try to become a data engineer. So, what would be?
I guess people by default will want to try and put all the keywords on the plate, right? Try and look impressive. Oh, I'm using Cursor. Oh, Databricks. I've done this, or I've logged into Databricks, therefore I've put it down. I'd say for understand the fundamentals, right? A lot of companies they need someone who's dependable, not just someone who puts down the keywords. Make sure you understand how to how to ingest your data, how to model your data, understand what your code is actually doing, and then try implementing those in your Databricks, in your Snowflakes, in your AWS. Don't try and look all fancy at first. Try and make sure you look dependable. Because if you have the fundamentals, the foundation there, building on top of that with any tech stack becomes very easy.
So beginners take this advice and move forward, and that's Zain. So before that,
Sorry,
I
just to interrupt you there, and it's not just that. It's not just having, but it's for juniors or any role, I want to emphasize that it's not just about the technical skills. It's about the soft skills as well. You could, the people that you're going to be working with. I think I saw a chart saying that you spend more time with your colleagues up until the age of retirement, where then family, start spending more time with your family, and then colleagues less time. uh, shows a big impact in your day to day. So if you're going to, you wanna have those soft skills, those communications as well, right? As a junior, you want to make sure that um, you're not just representing, oh, I can bring this to the table technically, but as an individual, am I easy to work with? Am I easy to talk to? Will I be collaborative? I think that plays a very strong part in the hiring process, your overall well-being, and your enjoyability to a job. I think it's something like you are 70% more likely to stay at your role if you have one friend over there, like a genuine friend that you hang out, or you hang out with outside of work. And if you've got three friends that you hang out outside of work over there, you're like 80% more likely to stay. So it just shows that soft skills has a huge impact when it comes to these kind of things.
so networking and soft skills that will help the beginners, not only beginners, all the professionals, so that they can learn more and more. Yeah.
Absolutely, because we're at a stage where you know the tech industry is very multifaceted, and if you are someone who's not able to communicate well or have a conversation, how are you going to discuss with stakeholders? How are you going to have these conversations with stakeholders? How are you going to, if you're going to be a technical leader, how are you going to present and help people grow and understand things if you can't communicate to me? So all of these things, they play more, I'd say they play a stronger role. Like if I was to meet someone who isn't an expert in a lot of areas that I'm looking for, but I can see that with talking to them, they are able to learn quickly and they are easy to discuss ideas with. I'm probably more likely lean towards them than someone who is an expert in one of these areas.
Yeah, exactly. So with the soft skills and networking, they can share the thoughts, and they can also get updated with the latest things, and so that they can learn as well. So what you mentioned is really straightforward, and it's a good advice for each and everyone, not only the beginners who is listening. And so to the audience, that was Zain Chughtai from a business degree in Edinburgh to leading data teams, processing hundreds of terabytes of data in online betting platform. If that doesn't prove you don't need a traditional CS path, I don't know what does. So if you want more conversation like this, like real tech careers, real life journeys, make sure you subscribe. I am Sapapati. See you in the next episode.